Hey, everybody. Welcome to Uniform Stories in Service. I'm Dr. Edwards, and this podcast shares the real journeys behind the uniform. In this episode, I'm sitting down with John Cloud, a U.S. Army veteran and an AI strategy leader who now helps organizations turn artificial intelligence from buzzword to practical and responsible results as a founder of belix.ai, belix.ai. So let's bring John on and let's have a great discussion today. Hey, John, how you doing?
Hey, good afternoon, Jason. Thank you for having me on, sir.
Oh, no, thank you too. And you're in Colorado, you told me, right? So
That's
beautiful
correct.
weather where you are, I'm sure. So
We just had our first snow, and I believe they said it was the second longest that we haven't had snow or something like that. Like
oh
we
wow.
went the longest to the 3rd of December. I think the longest was the 10th of December. So
We had snow in San Antonio a couple of years ago, and we still refer to it as snowpocalypse. So
gotcha.
Texas and snow, maybe North Texas, but the rest of it's where I'm at in Texas. Like, no, we don't do snow. They don't do ice. They don't do salt. They don't. There's no plows. I remember walking outside, seeing 2 foot of snow, and I'm like, we got to go to Walmart now. Like, I knew exactly what was going to happen, right? You know what I mean? So, but yeah. So no. Thanks on. So, um, how did you first decide? Let's go back a little bit. So, how did you first decide to be in the Army? Like, what was the catalyst for that?
So this is a great story. I'm glad you asked, Jason. So in 1969, my mother and father both were in the military, and they were both stationed at Fort Benjamin Harrison in Indianapolis.
Yep.
At the time, my mom was going through, she was a whack. So there wasn't too much that women could do in the military back then. And one of them was she was a secretary. And she graduated like top of her class. She was handpicked by a general to go work in the Pentagon. My father came down on orders to go to Vietnam, a little bit different situation there, but they got married. She got pregnant with me. She was I'm trying to chaptered out of the military for becoming pregnant, medical discharge. Um, my father went on to Vietnam, came back, got out, and ended up getting back in like the late 70s, mid 70s, and he retired around 94. So having that legacy, and I also forgot my grandfather on my mother's side also was he was a retired master sergeant and he served in World War II and in Korea. So I've got a lot of military history. I've got cousins and a lot more. This is a only 20-minute podcast, so I'll keep it short. But I have a lot of military history in my family. So after the weekend at the college didn't turn out like I planned. From 1988 to 1991, I attended university in North Carolina at High Point, and kind of it wasn't what I wanted to do. My major started off as Eastern and European politics in 1988, and by the fall of 1989, my major didn't exist anymore. So I kind of juggled, fumbled a little bit, and did some pivoting here and there, and decided I wasn't ready for college. So I got out, um, worked a little bit, did a couple of odd jobs, and then ultimately just said I'm taking the ASVAB, and I went to the Army in April of 1992. So a combination of economics, not really sure what I wanted to do, and knowing that the Army would straighten me out and put me in the right direction. So I just kind of put all my trust in Uncle Sam.
No, and I mean, obviously, the Army is the best branch. I'm sure I'll interview people from the other ones, but I'm just kidding for everybody that's watching this. But it's an Army thing. We're not the best at everything, but we are the biggest. So that's why we call us the big green machine, right? So
That's right.
that's what my drill sergeant used to say all the time. Where did you go to training at? Where did you do basic in
So
AIT?
my basic was in Fort Sill, Oklahoma. I did
Okay.
the 2 months of basic there, and then I also did my AIT in Fort Sill as well.
So what was your MOS?
My MOS was 13 Romeo, which is a field artillery radar operator. And
Okay.
about halfway through the course, I guess I did one of those things where I was like, did you know that if you go to college and you're sober and you actually show up and do all your homework, you do really well? No way. So I had one of those moments, and they approached me and said, look, you're doing really well. We want you to go to the electronics course for this class, and it's going to be an identifier we'll give you. So I went from 13 Romeo, and they added it's hyphen X-ray 5. So I got I gained I think it was like a 10 level. I can't remember all the terminology anymore, but I became a 13 Romeo 10 designator because I did like the local work on the radar with the warrant officer, and things like that. So before we sent it to third shop, I would do my troubleshooting and then the warrants and then third shop.
So tell everybody who's watching, what is a radio? What is a radar operator for artillery, right? We all just, artillery is throwing big bullets, but what does radar do there?
Back when I worked on the radar and did such work, radar consisted of like two types of ideas. There's direct and indirect. Not so much direct, but it does exist. But like with indirect, you have missiles or mortars or things like that. So you're getting fired upon from things you can't see. That's what indirect is. And direct is where we're firing something that's going directly at you, more like small arms. So my radar, the one I worked on, was an AMTPQ 36, and it was a portable radar that I actually got to connect up to some. I can't remember all the nomenclature now. The I can't remember the 46s.
It's always A and something, right?
Right. It was the Chinook, and basically I got to prior to getting deployed to Tuzla, Bosnia. We had to do some air assault missions, and I happened to be in Germany at the time, so we were doing missions between Hohenfels and Grafenwehr and back and forth. And actually, I crashed in one of those. We landed in a German, was that a cornfield? But the guy set it down nicely. So I mean, again, you're bringing out these stories. I haven't thought about this in 20 plus years now. But wow, yeah. So the answer to your question is a radar operator. We track like mortars and rockets and things like that. More so with mine was smaller. We did more mortar type of thing.
And this is for like what, counter battery, right? You can fire back at them.
Battery.
Yeah. Yeah, so at least you could see them coming. I mean, it's kind of cool the systems that's advanced from nowadays, right? Which is pretty, the Sea-Wiz and stuff that they used and everything. But let's go back to that CH-47 story, because I've been in a bunch of CH-47s, like with I think Korea, when I was there, they called it the Black Cat takeoff, where they could basically spin on the takeoff or whatever, And I don't think I really had a good feeling about it, but the pilots were amazing. Army pilots are, of course, all amazing. But so I've never actually done a hard landing or anything in one. So what happened there? What was going on?
So we were doing a mission from Hohenfels to Graf, I believe, and as we were approaching Graf. So okay, this is a great story. I should have led with this. So I'm sitting in the back of the Chinook. I'm trying not to call it by our nickname. I'm sitting in the back of the Chinook, and all of a sudden I see a wire pop. It's not a wire; it's like a little tube, and pops, and this fluid starts coming out. And then all of a sudden I see another one pop, and then I see another, and then this fluid starts shooting out, and then they're popping. So I go over to the load master, who's checking out the load through the hell hole, and I'm trying to get his attention, and he's going like, leave me alone. And I'm shaking him, trying to get his, and finally he's like, what? And I show him, and he mouthed a couple of words, which I'll spare you. And then he immediately started talking to the pilot, and they now. Mind you, this is a Chinook that's carrying my Humvee with a radar on the back of it, so it's sling loaded. And so he's coming in sideways, and he manages to drop my radar in the trailer and land right next to it.
Oh, it's good
piloting. No damage. Like literally, I drove away from that with the Humvee intact, no problem. I'm sure there was mechanical issues with the helicopter, but as far as my equipment, I had to receipt a couple of the cards. That was it.
I'm probably what you call a nervous flyer, so I don't think I might have ever got back on that helicopter. It might take a while.
I'm trying to remember. The guys were out of Little Rock. I think they were Air Force guys out of Little Rock. Those were our pilots.
Oh yeah. And I'll tell you what's funny too is, and you got to give credit to these air crew, because like what's crazy for me is like just a normal day at the office for an air crew, right? I still remember a story. We're in Iraq and we're on a Black Hawk, and we Black Hawk a lot of places, and they had a teddy bear. The pilots had a teddy bear. Obviously someone's wife had sent them, and they'd kept it right between the two pilots on the deck there. And as they would turn, the teddy bear would slide, and without a beat, they'd be like, got the teddy bear. And then it would slide to the other guy on the other side, and they would have it. And then the whole time I'm in the jump seat, the lieutenant seat, looking at this thing like, do you want me to hold the teddy bear? Like, you guys need me to? I'm like, I'm kind of worried about the teddy bear thing here.
So they're distracting you, right? You're focused on the teddy bear instead of your environment, right?
Yeah, but the air crew, like that chief was like, hey, I'm busy, man. What do you It's
Passing time. That's right.
This is a normal thing, but yeah, they're incredible, right? So so let me go back a little bit to the basic training, right? Because I always ask this question, like, what is the one thing you remember from basic training? Like, if you could pick anything out of it that you remember, like, what sticks with you?
So it's not good.
It's okay.
Um,
It's the Army.
there was my best buddy in basic training. His name is Ryan Tate, and he and I were trying to like talk each other through and like, we can get through this, man. We can get through this. Our drill sergeant had taken our guide on and stomped it and broke it. And
Oh,
they gave us a mop handle. And
mm,
so we walked around with the mop handle for a guide on, and we sounded off with, I think, Looney Tunes was what we sounded off with. They wouldn't let us sing cadence. That's what I remember. It was so humiliating. It was embarrassing. I mean, I try to find I try to find logic in everything the Army teaches. You know, you learn a lesson 98% of the time, but at that 2%, I still wonder what we're supposed to have learned from that. Anyway, that's what I remember from basic.
yeah. And the neat thing about basic, right, is that, and I got lucky. I went through basic, and then later on, I was an
Right.
officer at basic. And so it was this weird system of going back and seeing the behind the scenes and stuff, how it happened. I mean, I'll be at 15 years later, but there's always that variation of different drill sergeants, and then the things that you don't see going on behind it. I don't think any of my drill sergeants would have ever crushed a guide on, because they would have had to pay for it. So they might not have went that far.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like the mop handle thing for sure, but yeah.
This was 1992, so it was post Desert Storm, and
Yeah.
pre-modern. So
Oh yeah, no. Yeah, well, I still remember going to Lewis in '92, and the sergeant major of the Army was there,
oh
and
wow,
he was gonna run. He was gonna run with this in the morning, and I was in replacement of all things, and he was gonna run with replacement. And the first thing he says is, "I'm still not used to wearing tennis shoes when I run." My whole brain at that time was like, "Wait, what? Like, what do you mean? Like, you
we only
always
run
ran
in
in
tennis
boots?
shoes.
Like, you don't realize how things change until you see someone who's been to both places. Like, and after you've served in the Army, before and after, and you see the way things are now, like, and people ask me all the time about the Army now, and I'm like, it's amazing. These men and women are doing amazing things. Like, remember, what did you have as a body armor back in the day? You didn't have body armor.
Well,
There was none.
we
You
had
might have got a flak vest.
I had some kind of we called it Kevlar, but it was like a flak vest.
It was the flak vest, that thin flak vest that you got,
Yeah.
right? That basically did nothing but made you sweat more.
It was
That's
a
all it did.
pillow. It was a pillow.
Yeah.
We folded
And
it up, and you could use it as a pillow.
And the most important thing is God forbid that you don't have your first aid pouch upside down. The little first aid pouch, right? Because you got to be able to grab it. And
Right.
I still remember years later trying to use that. And this was not in combat, thank God, because we still had the old ones. But I had a trainee. This is when I was at that basic training company. He pulled something off a shelf, and it hit him in the head and split his head. And I'm like, so I grabbed the first aid kit, and I'm like, nope, need a towel. I don't know why anybody would have ever thought this thing would have ever worked, right? And nowadays they have these amazing, huge kits that you got to go to training for, that have like HEMA bandages and stuff. And so, I always like to go back and look at the stuff we had, and we had what was called a budget shortfall. That's what the Army had in the early 1990s. We had a budget shortfall. So
I want to say that like the radios I used in Fort Stewart when I first got there in late 92 were the same radios my grandfather used in Korea, the ANVRC 46s. That's not even an exaggeration. And the it wasn't even LBV, it was LBE. We had the old LBE that I got. Yeah. Gosh, anyway. Yeah.
The plastic string bikini that we all wore. You know what I mean? Like with the little belts and your two canteens and of course, the NBC thing, the mask, right? That you had to have on at all times.
The other pillow, yeah.
Yeah, and then back in the day too, right? We had we didn't have the saw, the 249.
Right.
We had what the guy who was called the automatic gunner, who was the only one who would fire his M16 on full auto, and you would have double pouches, so you almost knew who he was, right? Because he always had the double ammo pouches, all the way around and stuff. But yeah, just and anything you really liked, you bought yourself, right? Remember back in the day? That was, matter of fact, that's when the Gore-Tex came out, the Gore-Tex jacket, right? So it was like in '92. Yeah, and everybody wanted that thing because we all had the field jackets, and I don't think people nowadays understand the pain of that thing.
What was that magazine? Was that called US Cav or something like that we used to order out of?
Yes, US Cav. That's right. It may still be there. I don't know.
Right,
props
I
to
haven't
his.
seen one since '96 as well, but I remember
Yeah.
getting Gore-Tex and some kind of like socks or something. Some kind of the socks didn't. The Gore-Tex was fantastic, but the socks didn't work. All they did was make you sweat, which made you have to take them off. So yeah.
No, and you get blisters with those things. Cotton socks are always the best. But the one thing I learned later on, and this is just for any soldiers that are watching,
Mhm.
right, is the one thing we used in the Ranger Regiment was we used the bandage spray. The stuff they'd spray on before you wrap a bandage. You
Right.
spray it on your feet, put your socks on, and it glues the sock to your feet. And
Interesting.
it keeps blisters. I mean, it's an amazing thing. But
Right.
I've seen everything, right? Look, or the guys who tried to wear their dress socks inside of their actual socks, and like, and
Right.
and, and I
Or
remember once I had a
stockings.
yeah, Sergeant Major of the Ranger Regiment. He's like, you know what? You're just gonna get blisters for a
Mhm.
while. He was like it's there's no trick to it. It's just calluses. You got to
Right.
get more calluses, right? And he was so right. So, but let's talk about so. Did you pick Germany? Did you try to pick Germany? Were you given Germany? Was there or just was there happenstance? You got Germany.
Germany was on my wish list. When I went in, I put down Colorado, which was Fort Carson, and I put down Germany. So I got Fort Stewart, Georgia, And then actually, about a year later, less than a year, I came down on levy. Like I wasn't even at Fort Stewart for an entire year. Like that's the most Army thing ever, right? They send you
Yeah.
to a place, and then you're not even there for a full year, and you go somewhere else.
No, I know the feeling. I absolutely know the feeling. And the Army, well, and I would say that probably changed later on where they were more considerate about it. But like, yeah, they didn't think anything. Usually, because a stateside assignment, right, is like 3 years. That was the thing,
Correct.
right? It was always 3 years, and it was 1 year if you were overseas unaccompanied, or 2 years overseas or more if you're accompanied, right? But like, yeah, and it's interesting. So Fort Stewart, Georgia, I did a lot of time at Benning, so I know Georgia and the
Right.
Red Ant population very well, right? So
Well, yeah, I'm not a fan. Not a fan.
no, look,
But
it's
see,
a great state. Don't get me wrong. I'm proud of my service there, but like I've
right.
never been eaten alive by more insects. And I was in
So
Panama. So
when I talk garbage about Fort Stewart, I say it with love because, I mean, literally, like once you learn about boar hogs and gators and mosquitoes and things like that, you start to love it. So if you like to hunt or fish and things like that, it will be perfect for you. But there's also when I was there, and again, this was 1993 now, so 93. There was two big, large. And by the way, Georgia's hot for anybody that doesn't know. And when I say hot, I mean hot, hot, like
well,
hot.
that's why they call Atlanta Hotlanta.
Oh
So
God,
it's
it,
yeah,
it was. There were two transformers that ran the ACs on post. One was for the hospital, and one was for like the housing area that I lived in the barracks. And so the one for the hospital blew up or something happened to it, and so they took ours. And so we didn't have any AC. I remember laying in the bed with the window open. It was like a palmetto bug fell on me, and there's nothing I could do about it. I mean, palmetto bugs are like roaches with wings. For those that don't know, but yeah, it was just miserable. But here's the thing about it, though. The training is the best because they're on something called DRF, right? Deployment Readiness Force, the 18th Airborne Corps. They might not actually. They're not anymore because they're the third ID now. They're not 24th ID anymore. That's right. So before they were part of like Fort Bragg, 18th Airborne Corps, and we were DRF. So about every 6 months or so, there would be a different guy that was, had your duffel bag taped up with a certain color tape, and you had to
yeah.
be ready to go, and all your stuff's down at the motor pool, etc.
Yeah,
Good
A
time.
and B bags too. Remember A and B
Good time.
bags? The
Oh
the B bag got there eventually. The A bag was the one you wanted on the plane with you, right? So that's the one. And of course they wanted all the good stuff in there, and you wanted things like civilian clothes and socks. The Army's like, here's the packing list, whatever's left.
Right.
This much. I went to Korea, and I think I had like that much of the duffel bag was mine,
Wow.
right? And then I remember getting there, and all the NCOs who knew the Army, right? And they're like, they had all these amazing civilian clothes. I'm like, where did you get all the civilian clothes? And they're like, well, did you actually pack all the socks? I'm like, yeah, like I have the NBC gloves, I have all of these
Right.
things, So because the Army was very, very intensive on we're going to have a chemical war back in the early 1990s,
That's true.
right? That we were very serious about it. I think when I went to Afghanistan, mine set in a Connex for a year. Like we need, like, and matter of fact, my supply NCO was like, you don't get to take it out because I don't want to lose it. So like, it was like, hope we don't have a chemical war, but you're not getting it if we do, so okay. But yeah, the Army, people don't realize the Army back in the 90s, right? It was, I like to call it the budget times. It was the, you don't have enough money times because we were coming out of Desert Storm and it was the Clinton drawdown.
Right.
and we
Oh, wow.
gutted the NCO and the officer corps, right? Remember, all junior officers, like they almost got rid of all of them at the time. Funny story, later on, my OCS, when I went to OCS, the first sergeant Ermey, who was the first sergeant of the OCS company I was in, was an actual graduate of the same company as a Lieutenant Ermey, like 10 years earlier, 12 years earlier. And he got riffed. And instead of getting out, he chose to stay as an E6. Like captains could become E6s.
Gotcha.
And so ended up he became a first sergeant, later sergeant major, right? But it was weird. He was a first sergeant in the same company he graduated from. Of course, when he retires, he's a captain. But I had a sergeant major in Turkey. Was the same way. He retired and he was captain on his retirement day, right?
Nice.
So it was because he retired at the highest rank. But
Gotcha.
yeah, people, I don't think the budgets, and if you're into the transition, was always weird, right? The 90s versus the 2000s versus the 2010s plus when I retired, it was just so different on the money side, right? Like the barracks. Remember the barracks? The worst things in the world, right? Stealing cable and running it to your rooms and people climbing out the windows and just.
I mean,
yeah.
Are you like? Did you read my? I literally did that in Georgia. Someone held my ankles, and we went out, and you had to remove the filters off of the incoming coax cable. Like,
yeah.
How did you know that? Like, oh my gosh.
I think we all did that. I think everybody did that, right? You know what I mean? Back in the day, you're like as long as one guy got cable on the floor,
and then you throw a splitter on it, and then you got a couple of 100 yards of coax cable, not 100, but couple of yards.
Oh yeah, you just go buy that stuff and then you do the little, split it yourself and terminate. So I learned to terminate coax cable back in the day. Yeah. So when you got to Germany, where did you go in Germany? How did you get there? Like, what was your assignment?
So when I got to Germany in December or November of '93. So, and that's leaving Fort Stewart. After going through the replacement center in Frankfurt, they sent me to a very small town, still in Hesse, about maybe 40 kilometers from Frankfurt, closer to Aschaffenburg or Darmstadt, somewhere in that area, still central Germany. Basically, Babenhausen was the 48th Field Artillery Brigade. And my little unit, because radar is so tiny, we're usually attached to a larger battalion or something like that. But in this case, we were attached to the 48th, and we were Alpha 25th Field Artillery. So we were the Wolf Pack, and we supported 127 and 427, which were MLRS battalions. And so I say it's a small post, but I mean, I just said that there's two giant gun battalions there. And other than that, there was nothing else there.
Yeah. And for anybody watching, MLRS is the multiple launch rocket system. It's which is very, very kind of cool. Take out a whole grid square kind of machine, right? That's what I remember as an officer in the planning stage. They're like, grid square, done.
Right. And so when you're doing radar for MLRS, it's so cool because, literally and again, this is 30 years ago. So I've got like a spinning map drum is what I'm working on. It spins and it highlights a light underneath it, and you have to correct the elevation and then send it. But I mean, like when you're doing, so I didn't tell you this earlier. So I was telling only on the counter battery. We also do like friendly fire adjustment and things like that. So if you wanted to zero your gun or you wanted to just practice and throw some, lead down range, we can definitely do that as well. And so that's a lot of what we did was, in like graph or stuff like that. We would do the friendly fire and impact zone firing and things like that. But what I was going to say, to your point, the MLRS is one of the most amazing things you'll ever see. And I know a lot of people that I was not in the service then. I didn't come in until 92, but people that were in Desert Storm that got to see the MLRS said it was the most amazing thing. And we probably won't see something like that again. But
well, hopefully not. Hopefully we won't.
Agreed. But I'm saying from a military standpoint, that must have been really cool seeing that. I mean.
Oh, no, it is like living that moment. You know what I mean? Like living that moment, kind of seeing these things happen. Like I still remember the first time I saw an F-16 fly low over Baghdad.
Wow.
And it was doing it so the bad guys wouldn't hear the tanks and stuff driving up the road to do the mission. So the Air Force just kept flying their jets low over the city. Probably not very nice for all the people that live there that were not the bad guys, but it was a war zone, right? But seeing those moments, and it's always wild, right? Because after your military service, you work in a civilian company, and you don't have as many shared stories, right? But you get like two of us together, you know what I mean, or something like that, like you immediately start like, oh my god, I did this, or like I for example, the MSC fax machine. People don't know what that is. It was a drum that rotated that basically drew the fax, and you would pull it off, right, and do the weather or whatever it was. But like they don't have the same kind of understanding, right? You know what I mean, as a veteran does. It's
Right.
even if you're in different services, you all still have that. We all went to basic training at some point. We all did that, right? We've all been to a new base, right? We've all had family. We've all had to do these kind of things, and so it's neat when you talk to another veteran about it. So, did you ever deploy from Germany or just within Germany for training? Like, I think you said hotels and stuff.
Right. So at the end of in between my third and last year in the military, the Dayton Peace Accord was getting closer and closer to being signed. And so around, I want to say, and I can't remember, don't kill me on the details here, late November, early December, they finally signed the Dayton Peace Accord. And my radar unit had been chosen, my section, because we had 4 radars in my unit, but my section had been chosen to be the first radar to be on the ground. So they took us to bomb holder, and we loaded up. Go ahead.
And this is Bosnia.
Correct. I'm sorry. Yes, this is going to Tuzla, Bosnia. Correct.
Okay.
So they loaded us up on a C-130. We flew into Tuzla. We took some small arms fire, so we had to divert to Aviano Air Force Base. And then the next morning I got up and was like, holy cow, we're at the base of the Alps. It was the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. I'd been to the Alps, but just seen from that perspective. So we got back on the C-130. We actually landed. During the landing and just transition and all, one of my cards and my radar got damaged. I tried to reseat it, tried to do it. And this is not just any card. This is I want to say like $80,000 card. Super, super expensive card. Well, look, man, I'm not just any radar mechanic. I am the radar mechanic. So when we were coming in, like I didn't, this wasn't really part of our story, but I'll tell you anyway. So when I first got to Germany, this was like around February of '94, the Jordanians had been designated from the UN to come to Tuzla and operate a radar. So they were going to put a radar at the end of the runway and just protect the runway from hostiles. So when we were driving on Tuzla, I saw that old radar that we had given them. They abandoned it. As soon as they took some small arms fire, they bounced. So no offense to them, but there was a radar sitting there. So I'm sitting in the mud and a bunch of snow, and I can't get my radar to work. So I start doing my troubleshooting, and we have a warrant officer with me. So we together isolate that it's this $80,000 card, and we don't have that card with us. That's not one of those cards you carry.
Right.
And so I said, hey, there's that Jordanian UN radar that. So long story short, and I'll give you the short version, just so I don't implicate myself or anybody else. I went and I took that card out of that radar, and I got my radar up and running in steady state. And I'd do it again 100 times to get my radar running and protect my team and my peoples.
You were just shifting assets to make yours work.
Right. I could have said, I was in E4 at the time. I could have said that in a very different way, but I was trying to just be honest. So we got the radar up and running. I tracked the very first round that was trackable by the United States Army in Bosnia. That was kind of cool. We got it fixed and everything, and I got in touch with Third Shop. They eventually got my card RMA'd out. So the last part I want to mention about that is I did have to go talk to somebody. I did have to stand on the carpet and explain why I pilfered or to use your word, acquired a $80,000 card that wasn't mine. And all I had to say was, look, man, I got it up and running, mission first, blah, 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 whatever. Not trying to downplay that, but just I gave them the Army answer. I got my system up and running. I did any means possible necessary to protect our troops and protect our team and make sure that we're able to do our mission. And he told me to get out of his office and he never want to see me again. So
And the
And then I ETS'd and I was done.
So where did you leave? Where did you go back to after service?
I went back to Babenhausen and then ETS'd through Hanau.
So, and you remember the short timer calendars and everything?
I had the Snuffy. Back then we had the private Snuffy short timers. And I, in my tent, I had it over the tent so I could mark my progress. And which was cool is they when I was about 2 weeks or 3 weeks out, they moved me to a rear radar unit. Just basically, it was one of the big radars that we didn't move around too much. That was stationed on the airbase, because my radar, like I said, the smaller, more portable. We had gone out of the wire, not every day, but almost every day, and gone up to like Mount Vis, did some work with the Danish troops and things like that. So we were out enjoying rural Bosnia in the mountains.
But yeah, but again, it goes back to the 90s, right? The 90s was just so different. Like the one thing I remember too, and I learned, I stayed in, but was the boots. Did you throw your boots?
I did not throw those things. Were too expensive, man.
I know. I was like, boots. So like somebody who did that, but I get you'd see a lot of boots, right, hanging from telephone poles.
Yep, boots and tennis shoes. Like I would have thrown my my sneakers, but I think I was when I got back to Babenhausen, I had like 2 or 3 weeks to out process, and there was people coming through. Actually, Babenhausen had kind of turned into a staging area for people to rotate to Bosnia. So as I was getting back, there were people leaving. So that was kind of cool.
Plus, you don't want to get caught throwing your boots over a telephone wire by the MPs.
True.
You're ruining them for your last days of service.
Right.
Now on the tennis shoe thing, I probably, if I would have gotten out, I probably would have, and if they were my PT trainers.
That's where I'm going. Yeah.
Yeah.
Back there, my Air Pegasus.
Yeah. People forget the Army had we had our own tennis shoe for a while.
Right.
It was the one that you got for free in basic training if you didn't have your own, right? It was the PT trainer.
My gosh.
And they fell apart. Like they were basically sandals in a couple weeks, right?
I was going to say, I think the Asics and the Air Pegasus were like the two air technology that was kind of, like popular back then when I was going through. So.
And they sold them at the PX, right?
That's true. And exactly.
Yeah. And the other thing people forget about all the time was the AP's credit card. It wasn't a credit card when it started. It was your military ID, and your credit line was based on your rank. So I think it's like a PFC. Mine was like $300 or something.
See, I had DPP. We didn't have that.
DPP, that's what it was. Oh, no. Well, DPP, I think, was DPP for clothing and sales. I think that was clothing and sales was DPP, right?
I think you're right. It was only like PX.
Yeah.
You're right.
And that was the clothing and sales credit card, but it was your military ID. It wasn't like a real credit card and stuff, back in the day. Yeah. And so I remember my first one is my roommate. I bought the TV. He bought the Super Nintendo because we couldn't fit it on one. Right. So we had the TV and Super Nintendo. And when he PCS'd, he took the Nintendo. I'm like, oh man, and I was in a computer by then. So
maybe because I was just in Germany, but I used DPP at the PX and I could buy clothing.
Maybe that was
stereos. Yeah. Because a lot of people,
DPP. Yeah.
A lot of the Joes would DPP something and then take it right out of the PX and into the barracks and go, who needs a stereo for, $100 cheaper just because they wanted the cash? And yeah, I mean, that's bad and stuff. But I mean, all I know is, and this is again, my opinion, in 1993, giving $1,500 credit limit to an E2 is a bad idea. That's a good idea credit wise, but it's not a good idea to teach them responsible finances, right?
No, I never believed that we should have had a credit card, especially after I had one. And eventually you get to a point in your life where you just don't have credit cards anymore and you're so happy with yourself. But because they teach you not to wait, right? Why save money? You don't have to save money. You can just get it now, right? And again, we can go into a lot of things. We talk about that back in the day, but there was some predatory stuff that happened all over the military, right? The pay by the month, pay by the week car sales, and we all remember there was that big fraud in the 1990s where people could sell their retirement for cash, right? And these companies would collect it, and that became illegal real quick. But there was a whole bunch of just predatory stuff in the 90s. Yeah. And I never really saw it until I became an NCO and then later on as an officer. And then by that time, they were kind of cleaning it up a little bit.
Good.
Yeah.
I was going
Like
to say, I
as
remember
we were-
in Lawton, in Lawton, Oklahoma,
Good.
I remember like our first Freedom Pass or whatever, we went to the mall and just walked to the mall. And the very first time they saw us because of our haircuts and such,
Yeah.
what it was they gave us a free camera, but they sold you all the film for the camera, and it was like $3,500. And I was like, "There's nobody gonna fall for this. This is so dumb." And wow, there was a lot of people that bought that free.
We are the Army. We're the Army, John.
I remember like I was not in a position to counsel anybody, but I remember going. I was a couple of years older because I went in when I was 21,
Yeah, you
and I just
had some
remember going,
college, yeah.
"Dude, don't no, do the math."
I still remember the specialist in my basic training. We all called him the old man.
That's right. he was
I
our
had
he was our
I
PG, right?
Yeah, it was funny. I graduated high school on the 3rd of June. The 5th of June, I was 18, and then like by the 13th of June, I was in the Army. So like there was no time in between there because what else am I going to do, right? You know what I mean? But like, yeah, no, after all this time, I'm still so happy about the Army. Like I'm still proud of the service. There was so many crazy things that literally happened. We could talk forever about, but like to this day, right? You know what I mean? You're part of the big green machine, and I was irrepressibly happy we finally got a parade. I don't care about the politics,
Right.
but the fact that there was and it's funny as a soldier, you're like, wait a minute, like 50 guys got re-enlisted by the president. Holy cow!
That's pretty cool. Yeah.
I picked my favorite lieutenant. Like
There was a picture. A buddy of mine on one of the social medias posted a picture of him being sworn in. And I recognized the guy there. It was 4-star General Sullivan, who was I don't know if he was the Cinque Ursula back then, but he was very high up in USER, and in the European theater. He was very high up, and he was retiring. So he was going to all the small places, and he came to Babenhausen. And I remember he gave one of my buddies, Fred Ling, he gave him, I think he promoted him and gave him like an award, like an AAM or an ARCOM or something.
Oh, that's cool.
And but this buddy of mine, he posted the picture. It was him being, I think he was re-enlisting, and it was General Sullivan. And he goes, "When the 4-star tells you to re-enlist, you re-enlist." I was like, that's a great story, because most of the time it's no offense, your first sergeant or somebody like that that's swearing you in. That's pretty cool.
And it is fun. Like I still remember when I became an officer and I got to do it more. Like they always wanted, you to do it and stuff. And like they would do crazy stuff. Like in Alaska, we climbed a mountain. And I'm like, are you serious? But okay, let's do it.
Okay.
Or in the helicopter or something else, right? You know what I mean? Or some crazy in the pool. Like I saw one thing where these the UDT guys got underwater, the Army divers were doing it in the pool. Right. And it was like so cool and stuff like that. So, and that's one thing that we all share across all services is re-enlisting or enlisting or ETSing.
Right.
It's the same. It is the same. Right. And people forget too, like it's a majority of people who don't, a majority of all soldiers will only do one tour. Right. And that is enough. Right. Do you think about it? Right. You know what I mean? Like, and people ask me like, why did you go 22 years? I'm like, well, I was too dumb to quit. I was afraid of the civilian world. Are you kidding me? But like someone like you who'd been in the civilian world, right? You know what I mean? It was much more comfortable for you to go back, right?
Sure.
Yeah. So, and of course, you've obviously done well since then. So,
right. Jason, I wanted to point one thing out. I do criticize the Army only because I'm comfortable criticizing it with you. Like I wouldn't criticize the Army to somebody that wasn't part of the Army, only because, like you said, I'm proud to be in the Army, but when you're, like I guess it's like a family thing, right? When you're with your family, you criticize your family, but you would never let anybody else talk smack about your family. So
no, not a Marine for sure. So
even the Marines, I defend the Marines still.
Yeah. Oh, I'm just teasing, but it's always funny, like because you always tease the other services, but you're never serious. Like
I don't do that anymore. By the way, I gave that up a long time ago, just because it becomes when you see that person, you have to go, oh yeah, Army's better than the Air Force, or go Army, and I just, man, that's so much effort and everything, and I just respect the hell out of the guy. I don't want him to think or her to think that I'm, talking smack in that way or anything. So,
No, and it's teasing. It's never
Sure,
serious.
sure.
Like we're never serious about it. Like, I still remember this one Marine who told me that the Navy used to tell him that they were just his taxi driver. You know what I mean? And stuff. So like, and I always thought that was funny how we all
Right.
have something for everybody. You know what I
Right.
mean? Like, I don't know where we're gonna do a Space Force yet. I'm sure that's still kind of up in the open, but I'm sure somebody has complained about the
Right.
Space Force already.
You have to be creative with that one. That's right. I mean, we
They're
haven't had
probably most of
70
the Army.
right? We haven't had 80 or 90 years of, build up and examples to work with. So we're going to have to.
I met a member of the Space Force, and I bought a T-shirt when I was in Florida visiting my son when he was in Tyndall, and I was like, well, you're basically our grandchildren. Like we spawned the Air Force spawned you. You're essentially grandchildren of
That's
the Army.
funny.
So
Yeah, that's pretty
congratulations, we're
good.
still there. Yeah, you're not that cool yet. They don't have Navy ranks, which I think is weird. It's going to ruin science fiction if we have like colonels in charge of spaceships someday.
You're right. It's got to be Admiral.
Got to fix that. Like Captain
Commodore,
Kirk
right.
was not a Colonel Kirk. He was not Colonel Kirk. It's Captain Kirk, right? You can't mess that up. You gotta win it for us, But the one thing about the Army is we're the oldest and we'll always be the oldest, right? There will always be an Army, no matter what it is. You always need the big green machine. You always need the boots on the ground who can do stuff. The Marines can open doors. They can do a lot of stuff, but it's the Army that occupies. It's the Army that wins it wins the whole war at some point, right? The Air Force can bomb it. The Navy can bomb it. We can do all that stuff, but eventually it's boots on the ground. And I'm still proud of that to this day.
I do too. I am too.
Yeah. Right. And I love green. My wife does not get it. She does not understand it, right? She wasn't with me at the time, but like my girls don't understand it. They're like, Dad, there's other colors. I'm like, no, there's really not. There's really not other colors. It's like, and also I think the one thing that ruined me too over the years, right, is I didn't know how to dress in the Army. Like in the Army, like I only had like two basically. In the Army, you had your uniforms. You had what you wore to exercise, what you wore to work, and what you wore to dress functions, right? Or funerals or whatever. Right. Nowadays, I'm like, there's like a plethora of things you got to have. You got to match slacks with shirts. I never had to worry about that. So,
I think my move coming out of the Army was checkered collared shirts and khakis. And I didn't dress like that in the Army. I went to the PX like everybody else. I wore I think it was Ralph Lauren was like popular back then, or HL Hilfiger, Tommy Hilfiger. That's what it was. Tommy Hilfiger and polo. And that's over time when when I got married and started, my wife started having kids and stuff like that. I kind of adopted the not the old man look. I don't want to call it that because I'm not an old man. Okay, the mature man look.
We're older. Yeah, there's still someone older than us.
Right. We don't use pocket protectors anymore, and no one really uses pens either. I guess, everything is digital now, but still.
No, I think working for tech has ruined me because in my next job, I probably will have to wear a t-shirt or shirt. I'm going to you can't wear you don't have company branded shirts I can wear. Like that's at USAA, for example, I had like 20 USAA polos and then it was easy. I just wore the polo to work because nobody's going to say, oh, you got to dress up. You're wearing the polo, right? You know what I mean? Like, but yeah, I still remember back in the day, man, just the old, and I will tell you is, after you left, the Army is so different today. Like we actually, and I'm sure, and first of all, for everybody who's watching this, if a soldier's not complaining about something, check him because he's dead. So first of all, that is the Army motto. Like it's literally buried under there, but we all know the deal. So I'm sure there are soldiers complaining about things today, like, only steak on Fridays, right? But like the barracks, back in the day, the barracks were just horrible. We had inspections, right? And it was, and you were literally above the company commander. Like you had the floors above the company area. So there was no like hiding,
Right. Our barracks in Germany, and I'm not going to say the word, but our barracks in Germany were former German military barracks. Like, I guess Babenhausen was one of their like shadow air bases they built like around prior to World War One, and it still maintained kind of a military presence. And so during World War II, all the buildings that they used to house their soldiers, we lived in those. And what was cool, and I loved this. I forgot about this, but I loved it. Some guy came back who lived in our barracks in like 1961, and he was on Babenhausen, and he was like, "Oh yeah, there used to be like it was our storage area now, but it used to be his mess." And he was like, "Oh yeah, we used to have guys that made food, blah blah blah. We just told them what to make." And I was like, "Yeah, we don't get that. We got to go to the mess hall, and they give us what they want to give us."
And God forbid you get two proteins. Remember that? Remember that? Like back in the day, the chow hall, you're like, oh no, you get one protein, you get a bread. You can't have like two of anything. It was just
Right. No
weird.
seconds. Right.
Yeah. I just remember being hungry all the time because you're like, oh man. But the one thing you did get was omelets, right? They would make omelets in the morning. You didn't have a lot of choices, but it's pretty much ham and cheese for me always. But like you still got an omelet, and that was better
Right.
than the scrambled eggs and T-rats. Man, we could talk about those forever. So the big things you
Yeah, not a
boiled,
fan.
remember?
Fan.
The Western omelet, and they like 12 pounds of fudge or pudding, whatever that one was. Like I remember like we got one once and it was all pudding. We're like, where's the other stuff? We can't live on pudding. You know what I mean? Like, but there's these big giant pans and they're like super K-rats. They use
Yeah.
back
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I had a lot of those. Yeah.
The Western omelet was my favorite. You talk about the same thing every time. You just boil it, open it, they'd serve it to you in that the MKT trailer, the thing with a million pans.
Oh,
remember that thing?
Yeah.
Oh, and I always felt sorry. First of all, cooks in the Army have the hardest job in the damn world. I'll jump out of airplanes. I will literally I'll fix tanks. I'll do whatever I will. They just had the hardest job, period, right? They were up before everybody else and they worked their asses off. Although you did have to do KP and clean their stuff. So, but I still remember when we would do company layouts and they had to do the MKT. That was a whole day. There's and I used to think the mechanics had it rough because remember they had all the tools and the sockets and you had to have all the things aligned. When the cooks pulled out the MKT, that big trailer, and they had to pull all the like that thing was like the ultimate camper. Everything pulled out of it. Like there was something all around this thing. Like whoever came up with the MKT was literally an unsung genius. Like he's like, you know what? I'm going to fit an entire mess hall into a trailer.
Right.
Like the ultimate use of space, right? You know,
I'm going to tell you, and on one of the exercises, and I'm just going to say this from a third person, somebody was doing, what is it called? When you're on the op four, they were op four, the opposing force.
Yeah.
And somebody had just set up an MKT and was getting ready to serve some hot chow. And somebody drove by and threw some smoke and contaminated their hot chow. And they were not allowed to have hot chow because it was contaminated. And I have never seen a more group of angry people the next day in my life.
You do not mess. There's three things in the Army that you don't mess with. It's food, mail, and pretty much the religion. Right? Your church services, right? There's three things you don't touch. And hot meals is literally on a commander's priority. They're like 2 hots and a cold, 1 hot, 2 colds. But the breakfast one, if you ever had a chance, that was hot. And if you didn't have a hot breakfast, that's literally the most miserable thing in the world. Because you know what it's like to eat MMRE during breakfast. You're like, well, it's meatballs for breakfast or whatever. And it's cold as hell and the chemical heater. But man, you mess with someone's hot chow, like that'd be a general level.
They were not pulling perimeter duty as they were supposed to, and somebody the op 4 was able to infiltrate and get close enough to send the smoke to the MKT. And when that happened and they were declared not able to eat the hot chow, they literally dumped it on the ground and dumped it out in front of them. The next day, the perimeter was so tight, nobody could infiltrate the perimeter. Nobody.
I would have found the op 4 guy. I'd have found the op 4 guy. We'd had some talks. You should have known better. Like, what are you?
So they were so good. They had like a video camera. They acted like they were CNN, and everybody wants to be on TV. They were just videotaping all of their, 60 positions and all of their. It was really smart. It was so good.
Yeah, we've learned stuff different nowadays, right? So, but John, look, hey, thanks for coming on the chat today. So we're gonna have John also back on our cyber channel because John does a lot of work with AI with belix.ai, belix.ai. If anybody wants to go take a look at it, so this will be on our YouTube channel. There'll be some shorts, John. I'll give those to you as well. And if you, as a veteran out there, would like to be a part of this podcast, please go to trackpads.com and sign up, and we will set up a time and talk. We want to talk to everybody. I'd also like to find some cooks. I need to find some cooks because the one MOS that had the highest retention bonus was cooks. It was that or the NBC guy, right? Because nobody wanted to be chemical. And so those guys got SF got like 20 grand. There was only the 3 people that got 20 grand. And it was almost impossible to find cooks because they just worked their asses off all day, every day. And I remember because we had cooks living across from us in the barracks when I was a private, and they just were never there. Like they could never be home. Like, anyway. So, but I'm pretty sure, it hasn't changed. I'm sure that's still one of the hardest working things in the Army. So, but anyway, John, hey, it was great talking to you. I appreciate it. And you have a good rest of the day, sir.
Jason, it was a pleasure to speak with you and meet you as well. And I look forward to speaking with you again. All right.
Awesome. Thanks, John.
Thank
Have
you
a good
so
one.
much.
You too. And everybody, again, if you want to be a part of this podcast, go to trackpads.com. I will put the QR code up here real quick. If you want to use your phone to sign up, it'll take you right there. Go there, click on uniform, and then fill out the form, and we'll get back to you and get something scheduled as soon as we can. So if you're watching this, have a great Army day or whatever service you're in. Two Army guys get together, it's all going to be trouble. You know that. So, all right, everybody, have a great evening or day and evening or morning, and I will see you next time. Thanks.